Do you ever wonder why it is easy for some people to stay lean while others struggle with weight loss their entire lives? After fighting the scale for 30 years, I discovered the habits lean people naturally follow so they never have to think about their weight. This made me feel like I'd finally found the cheat codes that everyone else had. Not only did they help me lose 50 pounds, but now I don't have to work so hard to keep it off the way I used to. So in this video, I'll share 5 fat loss cheat codes I follow that made losing 50 pounds effortless. Once you build these habits, keeping the weight off will come naturally to you as well. But if you keep falling for every quick fix you scroll past on social media, then you'll never have the chance to live in that lean body you've been chasing. First, you need to understand how fat loss is just like building a business. Both require investment, whether it's time, money, or energy. In a business, you may have to invest time in training. For a successful diet, you have to invest time into building the habits that help you reach your goals. One way I make the most out of my fat loss time investment is with the first weight loss cheat code, which in business is called eating the frog. No, you're not actually eating a frog, or any animals for that matter. Eating the frog is a strategy where you focus on the tasks that make the biggest impact on your business first. This works since 80% of your results come from 20% of your efforts. When you work on the hardest part of your business at the time of day you have the most energy and focus, this moves the needle in a big way. The same thing goes for your fat loss plan. In a world that's become far too sedentary, I find the biggest obstacle I need to focus on first is movement. Since building muscle is key to long-term fat loss, I make working out my first priority. This is the best way to eat the frog in a fat loss plan, since this is when my energy and focus are the highest, making my effort really count. I found whenever I push strength training off until later, it just doesn't get done, or I don't have the energy to lift heavy enough in order to get results. If you fall into the 80% of women who haven't made strength training a habit, the good news is getting results doesn't require a lot of time. Following a full body routine only 2 or 3 times each week is enough to build your metabolism by building more muscle. On days I don't hit the gym, I still take advantage of my early morning energy by getting a head start on my daily steps. But whether you're talking about a business or a successful diet, the first cheat code only gets you off the ground. If you want success that lasts longer than a few weeks, you can't allow yourself to become complacent. But what does that even mean? Did I use that word correctly? Going back to our business example, how do successful businesses withstand the ups and downs that come with building a company? Just because you find an amazing business strategy that drives sales, that doesn't mean that one strategy will work forever. While this leads some companies to fizzle out, those who can stick around need to adapt over time. The same thing holds true for your diet. But what does adapting your diet even look like? If you go all in on the latest trend and you vow to stick to that plan because that's what worked before, what happens when it stops working? You regain 50 of the 100 pounds you lost. That's what happens. Oh, sorry, that seemed a little too personal, but it's true. After losing 100 pounds with keto and intermittent fasting, I was convinced that was the only way to lose weight until I regained 50 pounds, even though I stuck to my plan. When it came to starting from scratch, I finally learned that if I wanted to remain at a healthy weight, that I had to adapt my habits and behaviors over time instead of rushing into another quick fix. Instead of going all in on day one, I began my new plan with smaller changes. First, I swapped out most of the processed foods I relied on in favor of more whole foods. This made it easier to naturally eat less calories while still having the energy to move more. Since a successful diet strategy requires more protein, I also made a consistent effort to increase protein from the 70 to 80 grams I was eating most days, working myself up to 150 grams over time. Since it's important to remain in a calorie deficit while adding more protein, I cut out some of the excess carbs and fat with meals, choosing to add extra lean meat instead. But I didn't make this jump overnight. I started by making sure my breakfast had at least 30 grams of protein. That way, I always started my day on the right track. This was easy since all I did was replace whatever I was eating at the time with a nutrient-dense protein shake. When it came to lunch, I made smaller swaps like trading 2 pieces of regular bread for a low-carb tortilla instead. This instantly cut 150 calories from lunch, which left room for a few more ounces of meat. This brought protein up even more. Instead of indulging in a side of chips, I chose protein-heavy sides like Greek yogurt, which easily cuts 50 calories while adding another 17 grams of filling protein. Over time, I made even more swaps that started adding up to big results. When I wanted to speed up progress even more, I changed out my side of Quavos for a big bowl of berries. As long as I ate the berries at the end of a high-protein meal, they kept me fuller longer for half the calories of the Quavos. At dinner, I'd only eat half of a serving of whatever carb I made while going easy on fat-heavy sauces. This left room for 5 to 6 ounces of meat with dinner, which always makes it easy to get 50 grams of protein while staying under my calorie budget. Since I always leave room for dessert, I swap my nightly serving of dark chocolate for a protein-heavy dessert like this strawberry protein icy. Even though the chocolate does fit into my calorie budget, this big bowl takes longer to eat, and the protein keeps me satisfied all night. Eating high-volume, low-calorie foods stops cravings for even more sweet treats at the end of the day. But making these swaps will never work if you don't also follow the next cheat code on my list. Let's go back to our successful business for a minute. In this example, let's say we're talking about a coffee shop. If you frequent a coffee shop because you love their ambiance and customer service, then you start noticing more garbage left on the tables and the employees start greeting you like, "Hey bro, what do you want?" Is it likely that you'll remain a loyal customer? Just like a business requires consistent effort over months or years to see growth, a successful diet needs long-term consistency for lasting results. But how do you do that? When I first began my high-protein diet, I found some days easier than others, since there were days I hit my protein goal with no problem, while other days I found myself hundreds of calories over budget while still needing another 40 to 50 grams of protein to hit my target. Through a lot of trial and error, I figured out that some food combos keep me fuller than others. This helped me realize the next fat loss cheat code, which was figuring out which meals helped me stay fuller longer and just cycling through those meals throughout the week. This meant I ended up having the same high protein shake for breakfast pretty much every day. Then I'd cycle through the same 2 or 3 lunch combos that kept hunger low, but only came in around 400 or 500 calories. Keeping my calories in check with low-calorie, high-protein meals I enjoyed during the day left room for bigger meals with more variety at dinner. But I still cycle through the same 5 to 7 meals each week that I know work for my macros. Whenever I get bored, I figured out new meal combos that fall between 400 to 600 calories while coming in around 50 grams of protein, since I learned this is the formula that keeps me on track. If you don't want to go through the same trial and error that I went through figuring out which foods are the most satiating in a calorie deficit, I'll link my high protein meal plan in the description so you can cheat in another way. But you'll never stay consistent with your fat loss plan if you don't also use the next fat loss cheat code. Just like you have to start with a long-term plan in mind for a successful business, the same thing is true for a successful diet. But how do you do this? This was definitely not my strong suit over the 30 years I struggled with yo-yoing weight. While learning all of the rules of whichever new diet I was following, I always thought I could stick to the strict rules long enough to drop the weight, and then I'd just figure out how to keep it off once my diet was over. I never anticipated all of the cravings I'd have just a few weeks in. And I never thought about the diet boredom that I'd experience after cutting out everything that brings me joy. This meant it was never long before I'd find myself falling right back into old habits. That set in motion days, or sometimes weeks, of eating off plan, causing me to regain everything I lost. Eventually, I'd reel myself in, vowing to diet even harder. But why does this cycle of extreme dieting, followed by returning to old habits, even happen? Just like you need to anticipate long-term challenges in any successful business, the same thing goes for your diet. Whenever you begin a strict plan knowing it's not a plan that you can stick to forever, trust me when I tell you that you won't just figure out how to keep the weight off once your diet's over. Especially since fad diets do nothing but destroy your metabolism in the process. That's the reason you need to start your diet with the end in mind. Because as hard as dieting seems, keeping the weight off is way harder. Just ask the 90% of dieters who can't maintain what they lose for more than a year before regaining everything back. When I set out to lose the 50 pounds I regained, instead of rushing into another strict plan, I focused on making easier changes that I knew I could stick with. Instead of cutting out all carbs completely, I cut back on carbs early in the day, and this allowed me to enjoy my favorite meals for dinner. Instead of slashing calories to 1,200 for quick weight loss, I ate in a more reasonable calorie deficit of 2,000 calories a day. And instead of rushing to lose all 50 pounds in just a few months, this time I had patience, which made it way easier for my new habits to turn into permanent lifestyle changes, which makes maintaining what I lost easy. Since I started my diet focused on sustainable changes that I knew I could stick with once I reached my goal, I no longer fall into the 90% of people who work so hard to lose weight only to regain it all back. But that never would have happened if I also didn't use the 5th fat loss cheat code. And this is the cheat code that I credit most of my success to. Plus, it's the cheat code that I insist all of my coaching clients use since it is such an effective way to get results. The reason it's so effective is this cheat code taught me something so important that 30 years of yo-yo diets never did. Some of the plans I previously followed involved tracking at least one metric for success. To get Weight Watchers to work, I had to track points. For keto, I had to track carbs. For intermittent fasting, I had to track my 16-hour fasting window. But when any of these metrics stopped working, the experts told me things like, I wasn't fasting long enough. Maybe a 22-hour fast would work better. In keto groups, I was told my carbs were still too high and maybe a zero-carb diet would help. I never even bothered asking for help in Weight Watchers groups because seriously, who can stick to 23 points a day? That's like 2 Twizzlers. Even though paying attention to any of these metrics was never a long-term solution, I wasn't ready to give up on tracking just yet, especially since, as we've learned in this video, successful diets are so similar to running a successful business. And what successful business do you know that doesn't track metrics? Even though that was a really awkward transition, it's true. In order to run a successful business, you have to track sales, expenses, and other growth metrics. The trick is figuring out the right metrics that you need to track, which is exactly what I was doing wrong in previous diets. Because weight loss never comes down to how many carbs you ate today. And it doesn't really matter if you fast for 16 hours or if you could stick it out for 22. Because if you eat the same amount of food, you will lose the exact same amount of weight. I mean, unless all of that extended fasting completely crashes your cortisol, leading to sleepless nights, but that's a whole other video entirely. As long as calories are equated, following keto or intermittent fasting doesn't hold some sort of magic over regular old calorie restriction. Still, it is true that just restricting calories won't get you to your goal. That's because a few other metrics come into play for a successful fat loss plan. But once I took time to learn what those metrics are, and I started tracking them every day in my goal tracker, wouldn't you know, once I paid attention to the right metric, that pesky scale finally started moving in the right direction, even though I couldn't get that budge for more than 2 years. If you look at my goal tracker and think it is way more work than you're willing to put in, then you probably don't want to lose weight as much as you say you do. Because it takes less than 5 minutes a day to track how many calories you ate, how much protein you got in, your daily weight average, and how many steps you took that day. Once you get in the habit of tracking these 4 metrics every day, and then you learn how to analyze your results, which again only takes 5 to 10 minutes per week, you will finally have the sustainable fat loss plan that you've always dreamed of. If you are revved up now that you see just how easy sustainable fat loss can be, then let's do this. But not all at once. Because unless you've learned nothing from this video, rushing into any new plan is the fastest way to stay stuck right where you are. But if you watch this video next, you will learn 5 simple habits that make losing 50 pounds easy. And when you're willing to take things at a slower pace this time around, it won't be long until you're posting these kind of thirst trap pictures to Instagram.